the Republican nominee gave a vague and meandering answer that was nearly 2 minutes long, during which he finally came to the realization that, quote, childcare is childcare. A day later, during his remarks to the Fraternal Order of Police in Charlotte, North Carolina, Trump proposed that drug dealers, sex traffickers, and anyone who kills a police officer should be punished with, quote, a strong death penalty. And at his rally in Wisconsin yesterday, he rolled out a new plan to modify the 25th Amendment to make it an impeachable offense for a vice president to cover up a president's mental incapacity. Now, that is an obvious and baseless political jab at both Harris and Biden. But it's really just another unserious talking point that Trump presents as something that he could do as president. But none of this is actual policy. It's purely political bluster meant to garner attention because this is mostly a vanity campaign. Trump simply repeats whatever ideas he thinks are politically convenient for him at the moment. And that can change from 1 hour to the next. When the candidate doesn't know what his own policies are, it actually makes it very difficult for the voters to know what they're voting for. Joining me now to discuss all of this is Jennifer Rubin, an opinion writer for The Washington Post and an MSNBC political analyst. Thom Hartmann is the host of the syndicated radio program, The Thom Hartmann Show. And Steve Bannon is a producer for The Rachel Maddow Show and an MSNBC political contributor. He's also the author of a new book, Ministry of Truth, Democracy, Reality, and the Republicans' War on the Recent Past. Jen, let's go to you first. Trump recently announced that he would be running for president again back in November of 2022. That's nearly 2 years ago. His campaign has been very heavy on fear-mongering and talks of retribution, but we've had precious little about policy from them. And yet, this is still a very close race. Does policy even matter when it comes to Trump? And is it a double standard, since we've seen so much pressure for Vice President Harris to make clear and release her policies?
Trump doesn't have any policies, and the notions that he says one thing and that's an indication of his policy on something is sort of absurd. He doesn't care about policy. He doesn't care about the country. This is about his own vanity. What he cares about is enacting revenge. What he cares about is punishing his perceived enemies. And yes, there's a horrific double standard. We still see these editorials, oh, Kamala Harris hasn't given enough details. She's rolled out a full agenda on domestic policy, including child tax credits, including stimulation for the developers to increase the housing stock. She's made very clear what her position on immigration is. She has a worldview on foreign policy that's very much in keeping with the bipartisan consensus. And you heard today, some of your viewers may have, that Liz Cheney says, if you're a foreign policy hawk, you should be backing Kamala Harris because she's the one who has a traditional view of American alliances. So this notion that Trump even has policies is, I think, a figment of the imagination of much of the press that would like to treat him like a normal candidate. He's not a normal candidate.
So, Thom, Jennifer just mentioned Liz Cheney. The former Vice President Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney, his daughter, who's a former congresswoman from Wyoming, have now publicly said that not only are they not voting for Donald Trump, they are voting for Kamala Harris. And these are conservative politicians who likely disagree with a lot of Harris and the Democrats' policies, maybe not on foreign policy, but on other things. Is this endorsement going to move the needle with anyone? And why are they so significant as endorsements?
I think there are a lot, and thank you for having me, Melissa. It's great to see you. I think there are a lot, and be here with Jennifer and Steve. I think there are a lot of folks kind of in the middle, low information voters, people who basically pay attention to sports and music throughout the year and maybe turn on the TV for what's going on with politics in the last 6 weeks before an election, for whom it will be, very consequential. It's the other problem, though, that I think that Donald Trump has, just to follow on to what Melissa was saying, or excuse me, what Jennifer was saying, is that when your policies don't work, you have to fall back on personality. You've got a whole Republican policy set here, Project 2025, or just classic Republican policies. Let's cut back Social Security. Let's privatize Medicare. Let's keep student debts really high. Let's not have the government involved in housing. Let's not have a national health care system, or let's even gut the one that we have, Obamacare. these things are not popular with the American people, and I think that that's a real problem too. But with regard to the Cheneys, I really do think it's going to have an impact, and it's a really bold and in many ways brave move on particularly Liz Cheney's part.
So, Steve, these endorsements from the Cheneys come as Trump has been escalating his attacks on Harris for not giving enough interviews or press conferences since becoming the Democratic nominee. Again, Donald Trump does not say a lot about his own substantive policies during public appearances. But he is saying a lot about Kamala Harris and whether she is putting forth her own substantive positions. Is this line of attack against Harris going to be effective? And if so, why is it effective, given that there's so little from him on policy as well?
Well, I think he's certainly going to try and go down this road. I mean, in the short term, it's true that Kamala Harris is a relatively new candidate. She just recently received the torch from the incumbent president, and so it stands to reason that she's going to be in a position where she needs to step up on presenting an agenda. But I think that what Jennifer was saying a moment ago is completely accurate. She's already begun to roll out an ambitious plan on housing and foreign policy, on economic policy, and I think that as more voters get to see that, it's going to affect the campaign dramatically, because there'll be a contrast between a candidate who has a clear agenda, a clear vision for the future, and Donald Trump, who has never supported and unveiling any kind of blueprint for change or for governing, not only from this year, but from previous cycles. He's, in fact, been actively hostile towards the very idea of sharing ideas and sharing a blueprint with voters. And so I think as that continues to unfold, it's going to have a significant impact. It's bound to have a significant impact on the 2024 race.
So, Jennifer, one of the issues that is really registering with voters is the economy. And you've touched a little bit already on some of Vice President Harris's economic policies. Can you draw a connection, or a contrast, rather, between the economic policies of both parties and what is actually going to break through with voters?
Well, I think Kamala Harris has returned to a very traditional Democratic position, which is we're for the little guy, we're for the middle class, and he is for the fat cats. Essentially, the only coherent economic policy that Trump has advanced is more tax cuts for very rich people. And his other brainstorm is to have extremely high tariffs across the board, which not only act as a sales tax on the average American, but really are a declaration of economic war against trading partners and a recipe for international recession. So I think in putting forth a mixture of pro-growth policies, such as tax incentives for small businesses, tax incentives for developers, as well as support for the middle and working class, the child tax credit, for example, a baby boom tax credit of $6,000 for one-year-olds. She is combining, I think, her Silicon Valley background, which is pro-growth, pro-entrepreneur, with a very traditional progressive background. And Trump is off there in this never ever land of big tax breaks for very, very rich people who plainly don't know them, and this very destructive trade policy, and which he justifies by misrepresenting that consumers don't pay it. So to the extent to which you have one policy that is coherent and is for shared prosperity, and you have another that is incoherent and for the super rich, I think that is a pretty defining distinction between the two parties.
Yeah. Tom, let's pivot a minute. Trump is already starting to spread lies about voter fraud in an election that hasn't actually happened yet. On your radio show, you call this the big lie 2.0. But you also point out that Republicans have a long history of using the big lie to attack our democracy. Can you say more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, this really started in 1964. There was this widespread belief in the 1960s among Republicans that Jack Kennedy and Mayor Daley had somehow stolen the election. Although you look back, and even if he had lost Illinois, he still would have won. If there was a state where there was anything skeezy going on, it might have been Texas. But basically, they turned this into an article of faith. And in 1964, they rolled out this thing called Operation Eagle Eye. William Rehnquist was probably the most famous advocate of it. He was down in Arizona. He was a big bear of a man. You know, he ended up Supreme Court justice. This is how he got started in Republican politics in the 64 election, standing outside polling places in mostly Native American and Hispanic communities, demanding to see proof of citizenship and basically scaring people away. And this was happening all over the country. In fact, the New York Times did a piece about it, and they put voter fraud in quotes. I mean, that's how new the whole thing was. Now it's just become an absolute article of faith among Republicans that there are, immigrants pouring into the country to vote, which is literally what Donald Trump is claiming, and many Republicans. And it's not true. Voter fraud is non-existent in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that worries about voter fraud because it just doesn't happen. Nobody's going to risk 5 years in prison to cast a second ballot, and no immigrant, particularly one who's not here legally, is going to go, oh yeah, here I am, notice this. It literally doesn't happen, but it's been a very convenient way to prevent people from voting, to make it harder to register to vote. We're seeing now Donald Trump is proposing, and Mike Johnson is backing, an effort to insert a draconian, you must prove your citizenship, in order to register to vote, to impose principally on the blue states, but across the country, that they're going to use to shut down the government this fall if they don't get their way. They think this is a winning issue. And we need to be pushing back hard and saying, no, sorry, there ain't no such thing. And let's just let people vote like in every other country in the world.
All right, Steve, I'm going to let you have the last word because in addition to trying to delegitimize the election, Trump is also trying to delegitimize Tuesday's debate. His team won the mini dispute about muting microphones, but Trump has continued to sow doubt about the fairness of the upcoming debate. What's the point of this, and what will be the likely result here with the voters?
Donald Trump has done this repeatedly, not only in this election cycle, but in the last election cycle, where he was suggesting that Joe Biden was somehow going to be on performance-enhancing drugs. And now he's doing it again, suggesting that ABC has kind of rigged the process and that maybe Kamala Harris will get the questions in advance. All of this is utterly ridiculous, but I think we know why. He's pushing these lines. He's pushing these lines because he knows the very real possibility that he's going to lose. And so he has to preemptively delegitimize this process so that he has an excuse come Wednesday morning. I lost the debate, he'll say, because the process was rigged against me. Well, we know better. The facts speak for themselves. If he loses on Tuesday night, it's because he's a worse candidate than Kamala Harris. He has to compete on his own merits, and if he performs poorly, and I think he might very well perform poorly, it'll be his fault, no one else's.
Jennifer Rubin, Thom Hartmann, and Steve Bannon, so much to think about. Thank you so much for getting us started this morning. And now a quick programming note. In 2 days, you can join Rachel Maddow and the team for special coverage and analysis of the first debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, hosted by ABC News. Our special coverage begins at 7 p.m. Eastern this Tuesday, right here on MSNBC. And coming up, in post-Roe America, women are punished not just for seeking out abortions, but for needing them. I'll introduce you to a woman whose life, health, and fertility has been put at risk not once, but 3 times by the anti-abortion regime in her state. Plus, the race for the White House isn't the only crucial election that we're watching this cycle. Control of Congress is on a knife's edge. And Kamala Harris is set to face off against Donald Trump in the first presidential debate since she took over at the top of the ticket. She's prepping with her team in Pittsburgh, and their strategy is simple. Be ready for anything. We're going live to Pittsburgh next. I'm Melissa Murray, and this is Velshi on MSNBC.
Mom, with these sandwiches, I'm gonna be the coolest guy in the lunchroom. I need to practice my cool guy greetings. Sup. Sup. Sup.
Want a chance to win $1,000 for a crazy shopping spree? There's a new winner every day. Will it be you? Download Solitaire Grand Harvest for free and dive into the exciting world of solitaire.